Hello guys, welcome again to AWS session. And in the last session, we basically discussed on how to create a static website. And also we used Amazon Route 53 to connect your website or to connect your domain to the corresponding website which you have hosted on S3 bucket. So that was all about our last session. So in this session, we will be beginning with basically new subset of AWS, that is AWS security. So as you all know that security is one of the most fundamental part of a system. So if your system is not secure, if your system is basically vulnerable to any malwares or any virus or any unauthorized access, then you may have to lose your data and it may cause a havoc. So security is one of the major aspects of a system. So in this case, let's say we have a software and we keep getting updates from a software. So every software company keeps on updating their software to prevent any unauthorized access, and if there are any new viruses which can affect the working of that software, or if they can like tweak something and just change something on your system or access some data. Let's say you have Oracle application wherein there's some virus or there is some attack that can cause the data to be lost. So in that case, or it can basically have a vulnerability with which hackers can gain access to data. So companies keep rolling new software updates to keep your software up to date and keep it secure. So you should keep on updating your softwares which are there. And the other thing is that, let's say you have some EC2 servers up and running and you have written a script to stop some EC2 instance. And if there's some problem in your script or something, or there's some access issue, so you could end up stopping all the EC2 servers which you don't want to do that. So your system should be secure, your script should be secure, and the access should be given to only the persons who are required to gain access to those scripts. And third thing again is that, let's say in the last session when we created a website and we hosted it using S3 bucket, and that website could be accessed by anyone over the internet. So in case we don't want the content to be accessible over the internet from anyone, let's say we want only 4 to 5 specific users to whom we want to give the access to that website, so we can control the access also. So this is just an overview. There are many things regarding security, so we will be discussing all the things from this session onwards. And before knowing these things, we will like to have a one word, or you can say some overview or definitions about some of the things. So we'll start with subnet. So subnetting is basically a process of dividing a large network into smaller networks. So you let's say you have an organization wherein you have your private network also, and you also have a public network with which you can access the internet. So you have a public IP with which you can access anything over the internet. Then in turn, in company, you can have a private IP and you have a private network in your company. So this basically subnet basically subdivides a network, and it basically eliminates the need of more public IPs. And it's basically a great way to manage the network. So this is basically an overview of subnet. So we will be discussing just one liner or some overview about these things. I would request you to go ahead and read about these in details, because we might need these, or we might need to know some overview of these concepts. Okay. So the next is firewall. So firewall basically prevents unwanted access to the computer over a network connection by identifying and preventing communication over disky ports. So if you know that Windows also provides a default firewall, and we can configure the firewall, or we can say we can configure which ports should be allowed to communicate. So let's say in the default case for HTTP we have port 80. And for secure communication HTTPS, we have 443, I guess. So when we know that we will be just receiving connections from port 8, port 80 or port 443, so we should enable only two ports from firewall. So firewall should give access to only these two ports, and we will block access to all the other ports because we are not expecting anything from those ports. So we can block any unnecessary ports from where we don't expect anything to happen. So again, firewall prevents unwanted access. So we know that we won't be getting any other connections other than port 80 and 4443. So we can block all the other ports. So we are blocking all the unwanted access. Next is routing table. So a routing table is basically a set of rules which is used to determine where data packets traveling from an IP network will be redirected. So it is basically a table. So and it is basically a row column table, and it defines, as it says, it defines set of rules which is used to determine the data packets traveling from an IP network. So it has basically set of rules. It defines how the data packets will be traveling over the network. So this is the simple definitions. So you can see routing table on your system also. I would again request you to go to some website and study in detail about this routing table. Next is access control lists. So ACLs basically, or they are also called as ACLs as it is written. So ACL is basically a table that tells our computer operating system which access rights each user has to a particular system object. So it basically tells our computer OS which access right each user has to a particular system object. And in this case, system object can be either a folder or it can be either a file. Basically tells our OS that this user has access or access rights to these things. So let's say if you have a folder and on that folder only you have access to that folder, or there are some files, you have access to write onto the file and you also have access to read from that file. But some other user might not be having a write access to that file, but he may have read access to that file. So read access is one of the most common access. And the last is gateway. So a gateway is basically a node in a computer network or a key stopping point for data on its way from the other networks. So gateway is basically you can define as a node or a router in your computer network, and it is a key stopping point. So gateway is the stopping point, and from that gateway the data will be travel onto its way from other network. So let's say you have a router. So let's say you have a computer and you have a router and you click some website, let's say www.facebook.com. Whenever you'll hit www.facebook.com, the request will go to your router, and the router in turn will basically redirect it through the network. So your router can basically act as a gateway. So these are some of the concepts which we reviewed. So I would like you to go ahead and study about these in detail. So first of all, it is subnet, then it's firewall, routing table, ACL, gateway. I think this is all. And if you want, you can also like study basics of internet protocol, and you can also go through what ports are and all these kind of details. So this was all about from this session. From next session or onwards, we'll be going into deeper concepts of security on AWS. So thanks for watching.